agree that adding AI and machine learning to the description of your company certainly adds several $1 million of valuation today. I think there's the question of exactly what is that worth. But it's interesting that all of you focused on the enterprise applications of AI and machine learning as opposed to what has been traditionally viewed in AI as enabling a computer to perform cognitive functions of a human being, which is the stuff we see in movies and books. So with that as a backdrop, let's talk about, since we're supposed to be talking about big companies from an investment and M&A perspective, how do you think about the ability of large companies to develop these technologies in-house versus the need for them to partner with smaller companies on the outside? So, Matt, I'll ask you first as sort of one of the representatives of probably one of the most aggressive companies in the SaaS universe today doing that, and then Stevie will be next.
Yeah, I mean, there's two parts to that. So on the how do we develop, we've obviously been very active on the M&A side, and I think that was a recognition. This is probably the fastest way to accelerate it. Everything from, people that are doing fundamental AI, machine learning algorithms, making sure we're using the best, most advanced algorithms, applying them properly, to engineering, to how do you manage all those algorithms, optimizing them, making sure you're using the right ones, managing the data, and then people who have an experience of AI, machine learning, and also product capability. Mm-hmm. So for us, it was, we've made a handful of acquisitions over the last 18 months to really build out that capability. I would say on the flip side, we still partner with people, but it's more around on the app. People who've built very interesting applications that can plug into our app exchange or something like that. It's kind of hard for us to be, I don't want to say it's categorically. There are some use cases where we do still partner, but if it's a core critical functionality, mm-hmm. Typically we're going to buy that. And bring it in-house, because if we're building an application and we're heavily dependent on some third-party partner, particularly if it's a smaller partner and they get acquired, then it's pretty risky for us. But again, so if it's not enabling fundamental technology, but it's more of an application that's going to feed into our ecosystem, we'll partner with those companies. But if it's fundamental enabling technology, we probably want to bring it in-house or develop it.
Yep. And Steve, what are you hearing in terms of your clients, particularly the larger companies in the financial sector, their interest in developing this expertise in-house versus where they're looking to acquire or partner?
Sure. I think you look at some of the largest banks in the world, like Citigroup, the number of issues they have internally that are around credit, fraud, authentication, ID, analytics, you name it, is massive. And there's really no way that a place like Citigroup or Wells or whoever is going to figure out. I mean, Wells couldn't even figure out that some of their employees were, creating millions of fictitious accounts. Sorry if the Wells people are here, but that's a huge problem in regulatory and compliance. You've got millions of consumers and hundreds of thousands of employees doing things. It's impossible to sort of, I think, have a group internally that's going to be able to solve all those problems. So you take a company like a PAZHAYAMPALLIL. I was talking to the CEO the other day. PAZHAYAMPALLIL is a kind of an anti-fraud company. Their whole business is around AI, and they're partnering with all these big banks and insurance companies around some of these super complex topics. And I think the guy told me they added 150 million of ACV in the last year, just exploding because these FIs just can't get it done. At some point, they're going to get bought, I'm sure, by somebody, or go public. But right now, there just seems to be a huge gap at the big companies in trying to do this stuff themselves.
There's like a widely understood but poorly explained thing right now going on when we talk about AI. And I think, I've had a hard time articulating it, but one way to think about it is, in the world that most of us live in, we think about software as being a set of applications and a set of data stores. And then there's this thing in the middle right now that people don't really have a good name for. Sometimes we call it algorithms, sometimes we call them models, and there are these chunks of software that take in a bunch of data and generate new software. Right? And these models are very different than traditional applications. And sort of understanding how we should manage, deploy, build, understand them, I think that is actually at the heart of AI, or at least AI in the enterprise. And I think my test in general, whenever I talk to a company, or big or small, is start asking them, so, okay, what are the models that you're running? I think the Uber guy made a good point that he had 8 models that he was running Uber Eats on, right? So like, and I think like that model-centric view of like the software ecosystem is actually like how I think about the difference. And when people say, "Oh, well, I have AI," and you say, "What are you doing?" They say, "Well, I don't know." But when they say we're having trouble managing our models, or we're having trouble iterating them, or changing them, or understanding when they work, then I nod and I lean in.
So the question about models, applications, and data, to me, brings up an interesting question around data, right? So there's a famous saying, it's been changed a couple times. I think Google's research director claimed, we don't have better algorithms, we just have more data, right? There have been some variants on sort of that topic. So can you buy or sell great data, and as a result, have very good AI outcomes? John, your thoughts?
Yeah, we generally don't look at companies that are buying data like that, because our view is if you can buy the data, somebody else can buy the data, and it maybe isn't super interesting. So we do have a bunch of companies that generate data in kind of unique ways, or they get it from sources that you wouldn't think to get it from. But on an open market, the way you would buy demographic data for ad tech or something, we don't look at companies that do a lot of that.
What about companies that have proprietary data?
Yeah, so we look for companies that are developing proprietary data, but if it's data that just you have, I guess maybe in fintech it's a little bit different. It's often not enough to build interesting models on top of.
You do have, I won't go into detail on it, but you do have some examples where Experian or Equifax or FICO have paid hundreds of millions of dollars for data sets before, so that does exist.
Yep. Well, that's interesting. Yeah?
No, I was just going to say, the Google, sort of Peter Norvik's point around lots of data answers lots of questions is really good. But the real secret is, are you asking the interesting question, right? And there are going to be lots of great companies that use other people's data in ways that, sort of the people who own the data thought were dumb or slightly illegitimate or, sort of like slightly shady, and then they will be very successful as a result of that. In some ways, I think that is the, that's the question to be asking. Like, what are you going to do with the data, and what sort of models are you building?
Yeah. So
I was going to say, also, just owning a data set is only one piece of it. I think to be ultra successful, particularly in fintech, you're going to have to collaborate with all your competitors. I mean, Wells needs to combine with all the other banks, with all the other fraud companies, and kind of collaborate in terms of big ecosystem models that are bringing in trillions of bits and bytes of data by the second around the world, to be able to really get the processing power. So I think the banks, the credit card associations, and everyone need to kind of collaborate to make it all happen, quite frankly. I think that there's a lot of barriers to that, where we're seeing more and more of it due to consortiums getting put together. So I don't think you can't own enough data to do what you really need to do. It needs to be collaborative in real time.
Interesting. So again, keeping up this theme of M&A landscape, according to CB Insights, there have been 140 AI-related acquisitions since 2011. And again, sort of if you view AI as a way to boost your valuation, maybe some of these are not pure AI companies, but let's go with that definition. And about 40 of those acquisitions were in 2016. So asking you to get your crystal ball out a little bit, look at 2017, 2018. Do you see the M&A activity staying roughly the same, heating up, or cooling off a little? Matt, you want to take a first crack?
I mean, it's hard to know exactly, but I still think it'll be very active. I don't see people slowing down. I'm not talking about Salesforce specifically, but I mean,
Please tell us exactly which companies you plan on buying this year.
But I think it also, I mean, if you look at some of the companies that we acquired, it sometimes gets confused. Is this an AI company, or is this an application that has AI built into it? So I just think that this is where enterprise software is moving. You're going to have more companies that this is a part of what they do. Those companies are going to be cataloged as AI companies, rightfully or wrongfully. And there's going to be still more companies. And I think what's really interesting is you start looking at companies like GE that bought ServiceMax for over $900 million. They have a large software division. Certainly, they have their Predicts platform. They're going to move into this space. You're going to have a lot of a lot of industrial non-tech acquirers that are building this sort of capability, and they're all becoming technology-enabled businesses, whether it's providing services or software. So I don't think that this pace of M&A is going to slow down, as there's just a scarcity of people that can do this well.
If you were to break it up between sort of like R&D versus applications versus infrastructure, do you think that the days of buying R&D teams is mostly past, or do you feel like everyone's going to try to catch up to you guys?
Are you supposed to be answering questions?
I'm sorry.
I think it's.
But it's a great question.
No, I think it's gonna continue for a while. I mean, you saw that with data science for a long time too, right? I mean, people were acquiring data scientists for a number of years, and it's still, we don't talk about that as much. We talk only about AI and machine learning, but they're still hard to hire and recruit those sorts of people. I think it's more has to do with, I think the acqui-hire model is cooling a little bit, and I think it's more, acquiring people that have a very specific skill set as opposed to like, hey, let's go buy this talented team. And I think that's going to have a bigger governor on the rate of M&A in the AI space, as opposed to like there being an interest in AI. I think there's just going to be more companies that need that fundamental capability, and they will buy talent.
Steve, what are you saying on the M&A side?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple deals in our space recently. Amex just bought a company for multi-$100 million that was, losing money, a few $1 million of revenue around authentication, ID, and, device. That had a bunch of what I would call AI. Maybe you wouldn't call AI. And Visa just bought a company called Cardinal Commerce. So I think you're going to see a lot of these $200 and $300 million deals where someone's done something really special. They haven't quite monetized it yet, but some very large FI can afford to pay $200-300 million for it and bring it in house. If you start getting an entity that's got $50 million of revenue, $100 million of revenue, growing 100% a year, that's going to be hard for an FI to go pay $1 billion for. So I think you're going to see a lot of deals in the sort of 20, 30, 50, up to 300 million range. And then you may see some larger companies go public, but a company that we would call fintech on the fringe is a company called Mu Sigma. Which has been doing a lot of private rounds and generally seen as more of a data science company, but getting more into machine learning. But you're seeing a lot of financing rounds happen. So because you don't need to get sold and there's infinite amount of money out there, that's one of the things that's preventing a lot of M&A. And then you're also seeing a lot of corporate venturing. So Goldman Sachs making investments in things like Kensho and other companies like Dataminer, and one of our clients, AlphaSense, getting, which is kind of the Google for financial services, B2B search. Getting a lot of corporate venturing. I think a lot of the big corporates are rather keep these companies out there than buy them, because when you buy them, you tend to destroy them.
I mean, I think that's a good distinction too. Is that a lot of the M&A's really been just buying, smaller teams, sub $50 million acquisitions. And so I think if it's just true core fundamental enabling technology, there's sort of a limit of what people are going to be willing to pay if it's these, not in all cases, but if it's these higher M&A valuations. Those are companies that happen to be doing M&A that are generating a lot of revenue, that are building, big businesses. But most of what we've seen and what we've acquired have been, the former. It's more enabling technology, good teams, not really big businesses.
John, I know you have a point of view in terms of acquisitions of teams versus products versus platforms. Can you share that?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what was said. There will be some bifurcation where these smaller teams maybe will continue to get acquired. I think they'll be a little more specialized, like you said, rather than just general AI people. But to get the bigger acquisition prices, we need to start building products and getting out into the market and generating revenue and those kinds of things. A lot of the big players, Samsung, Google, Amazon, Apple, Salesforce, have already bought platform areas and have plugged in lots and lots of little tuck-in groups. So it would be hard to sell a platform that didn't have a lot of revenue.
So the advice to the AI startups, either sell now for $200 million if you can, or build a real business?
We're hearing that a lot. I mean, I get the CEOs coming to me all the time saying, look, if I don't sell this thing now, I got to go create a real business, and so, no, that's...
Heaven forbid.
That's a direct quote. So that's in people's minds for sure.
I think you're better having a great product with a great user interface and mediocre or crappy AI than like best world-class AI and trying to find a problem to solve.
So I know we're going to have some questions from the audience, but there are two sets of questions for the panelists. From what you see, what are the most crowded AI fields? And I'll throw out sort of my favorite, which are bots for travel or customer service. And what do you think are most innovative or truly innovative AI companies going after sort of big greenfield opportunities?
I mean, I think we're at a point where we do see like Salesforce is obviously this great company, and so there are a lot of companies.
Thank you.
Amazing,
You
amazing.
work with Salesforce?
That's not what you said before you showed up.
That's right. And I think that there are a lot of companies. If I were to say where it's the biggest category of pitches I get, they are around sales and marketing and some way of making salespeople either more effective or making managers better at controlling salespeople. And I think what's interesting about that is, so on one hand, it's easy to make fun of, and I think I do make fun of it. But that said, because that is where there's all the variation and all the attempts at trying to come up with something new, I think what's interesting is I'm constantly looking for people who are coming up with slightly different business models. Because I do agree that under the hood, you're going to be able to hire good engineers to build slightly better models or better approaches. But what I've been surprised at is I've not seen a lot of variation in business models. And I do think somewhere out there, there's someone who's going to come up with a business model that is going to be hard for incumbent SaaS companies to duplicate or figure out how to compete against. And I'm surprised that people are coming to me and saying, well, we're just like Salesforce, except that we're smarter. And that's just not helpful, right? I mean, you're not going to beat a great company with a huge sales channel, lots of marketing presence, with something that is just 5% better. You do have to come after it with a genuinely different AI-centric, sort of business model, and that's what I look for.
So I should just walk off now.
Yeah, drop the mic.
I mean, obviously, so I'm a little biased, but yes, I've seen a lot of this, of the same in predictive marketing, bots for sales and service. So we've seen a lot of those retreads. We're seeing a lot in voice, and it's kind of really hard to distinguish the distinction between the voice being able to tease out insights from phone calls, whether it's for service or sales. What I think is interesting is just viewing this as one little piece of the application that you're building. And so I think, how do you integrate this with messaging and other things to make a really simple, like a good use case. There's a company in New York called Abacus that does expense management, and where they're trying to go to with it is, if you and I are having lunch, it should just be able to look at my calendar, take some rules, be able to apply that and say, oh, this is in doing more than rules, but and realizing hey, this is a lunch expense. Here's go ahead, put it in Concur or whatever, and then integrate into Slack, and I just get a message. And it just says hey, approve this or not, to where you're making all the transactions just very dead simple, anticipatory, being able to, integrate all your applications together. I think that's where the real breakthroughs are going, where it's just the way you engage with enterprise apps is just completely different, and I don't have to log in anything. It's just saying, you just did this, approve this for your employee, call this person. I think that's where the real innovation comes, when you start to combine all these what I call services. I think a lot of the AI and messaging is just another service that has to be layered into application. I think that's where you're going to see, SaaS 2.0, or I don't know if we're on 3.0 or 4.0, but I think that's the interesting place for me.
Cool.
I mean, just taking a little bit off of that, I think, some of that stuff sounds like, a bunch of if-then statements saying if I ate lunch here, put it in there. So I don't know how much machine learning is really getting, deep into these applications. And maybe I'm, hitting off of your point. But, and that's the thing. And we see banks that, I mean, the very data they have right in front of their faces, they're not using simple if-then statements to, figure out how to do the correct kind of marketing to their consumers. So, some of it's not about, do I need machine learning? It's, do I need to just, be smart and do the right things with my business? And so I think it's going to be this, to me, the big part of AI machine learning is going to be solving huge problems like healthcare and I was going to say in credit scores, but that's not as big of a problem. So let's talk about healthcare and things like that.
Yeah, I see a lot in legal tech in AI. I happen to be a lawyer, so a lot of those deals sort of find me. And the interesting thing about law, and you see some of this in medicine too, is there's a very large body of data that's available that's hard to consume. And from that data, you can make all kinds of interesting decisions, but it's the corpus is too large and the data is too nuanced to be able to pull out with your own brain. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on in there. A lot of it, I see probably too much of it, and some pieces maybe aren't broad enough to make progress, but I think there's going to be really interesting stuff in both law and medicine around that.
So I think we're about 5 minutes left. Let's take some questions from the audience. They're up on the screen. And John, I think it's probably going to pick up on your last one. So what are the untapped domains for AI? Maybe medicine?
Yeah, I think medicine is big. Medicine has all kinds of regulatory issues that maybe are a little bit less in law. So if you have to be HIPAA compliant and things, it can be hard to consume the data and regurgitate it in an appropriate way. I've seen lots of businesses that are trying. And then in my personal view, there's a lot in law. There's a big financing announced this week or last week. It's a company that reads in legal briefs and then uses AI to, or at least it says it uses AI. I don't know the company.
Are they
very
raising
well,
money?
But they just closed a $12 million round to look at your legal briefs and then suggest cases that you can use based on the judge you're meeting with and things, which is a pretty interesting application.
There's a way in which enterprise software has hit a dead end where the time it takes to configure anything is so long and so difficult that sort of companies are no longer able to be effective because it takes like 18 months to customize software. And what's interesting is in the history of AI, that happened in AI. We had expert systems that took way too long to configure and were really hard to manage. And those those expert systems-centric models were replaced with machine learning. And I think that there are similar opportunities to do that inside enterprise software, where the way we think about configuration and customization fundamentally changes because we rely on the system to take feedback rather than explicitly get designed.
Steve, anything to add to that one?
No,
Jump
good.
next. Okay. So the one that I like is the next one here, which is despite the focus on AI, it doesn't seem to have significantly changed the life of the quote average person, close quote. I'm curious whether that refers to an average Silicon Valley person or an average person around the country. So realizing that's not one and the same. Question, is this true and will this change in the next 10 to 20 years? I have a bias, but I'm not answering the question.
I don't even really know the answer to this question specifically, but I'll try it anyway. I'm assuming that all the stuff that the government's doing with AI, maybe this is a stretch, but
our government or the Russian government?
What's the difference? Yeah. No, look, I'm sure there's a lot of things going on that IBM and Watson and the government and other folks are doing and with healthcare. I think there's an enormous amount going on there that's probably making people's lives a lot better. So it's not what you see, asking Alexa, what's for dinner or what time's the movie start. But it's the stuff going on behind the scenes you're never going to see that's making life better.
So actually, I have a bias. I think that particularly the voice recognition part of AI or ML, I think has changed the lives of a bunch of people, particularly those that can't use their hands. So I think the hands-free element of that, not just in terms of asking what's for dinner, but actually letting people use computers who couldn't before, to me is a perfect example of technology making the world a better place.
And there's an observation that the moment AI becomes easy to do or some particular problem becomes easy to do, we no longer call it AI, right? There were these mechanical robots that would make bread warm, and they were called like bread robots. And the moment it became doable, they were marketed as toasters, right? I mean, I think this is that's 70 years ago. So this happens over and over again.
I bet you that person used Google Maps to get here too, right? Where are you? No.
We're good? All right, I think we're good. We'll end the panel on the fun note that whatever it is we're looking at is hopefully going to be the equivalent of the toaster 70 years from now.
There you go.
So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex.